Hey guys, welcome to this week's live stream. It's me again, and we've got Gabriel as well.
Hi guys.
Yep, on today. And yeah, first off, again, we want to thank Cassette for coming over last time and presenting their case study. The feedback we got from you guys was really positive, and that means a lot. I think what we'd like to do going forward is try to hear your stories even more and to share them, you know, among studios, because I think one of the misperceptions that is ongoing in the studio base and the community around the world is, yes, it's great to see these hit game case studies, but it's also nice to see the struggle, the work, the failures that came before it, and maybe that's something we need to be better at sharing. So the more we hear about your stories as well, I think the better we'll be able to communicate the story of each of your studios. With that said, we are going to talk about a hit game today, which is a game that Orbital Knight came up with before the summer, and which we started scaling towards the end of August this year. So Crazy Kick, we've got a few slides for you, which we'll pull up on screen now. You know, it's really the case of one of those great hits that that kind of took us by surprise. The first thing that really struck us when we saw the game for the first time was the nature of kind of the avatar and how the player is able to project themselves onto the game. And just to clarify what I mean by that is simply that you have a soccer ball, and there is that soccer theme, which isn't really in the name. Crazy Kick is a pretty generic name, but there's definitely a soccer or football theme to the game. So the question is, why is this, as I mentioned on this slide, which I think is on screen. Let me double check. Do we have? Yeah. So the slide that you should be able to see, which, you know, why is this strong marketability when in fact you might think, well, you know, this is a niche game. It appeals to a soccer crowd or a football crowd, and you know, how are we going to get millions and millions of users interested in this when actually the core audience will be relatively small if we're comparing it to like the mass population that play hyper casual games. The truth is that there is a bit of a twist in this game, which we'll uncover in a second. The second thing that we think really made this a successful game was the depth. So there are many ways to play the game. There are ways you can take shortcuts in the game. There are many choices that you are addressing as a player at any given time. There's risk and reward that you can reap from that risk. And then there are a few features and balancing features as well that helped really lift our retention long term. And so all of these ingredients kind of made Crazy Kick a fantastic hit. The last thing I wanted to address before we get started was the category of game that this belongs to. It really is more in the kind of Castle Rec, which came from the same studio, kind of knock balls and flip dunk, in the sense that these users are a little bit male dominant, so I think easily 70-80%, I believe, of the user base is masculine. Typically, we do aim for a mass audience market, so 50-50 is, ideally. Even 60-40 is a well-balanced male-female ratio. In these types of games, it's more of a male audience typically, but it's also a pretty retentive, slightly more hardcore player in a sense. And therefore, the kind of the value that you get from each user, even though you have a bit less, is stronger. So for instance, playtime is typically on these games around 15 to 20 minutes a day, which is very heavy, and which enables us to scale the game, even as the maybe the CPI can increase a lot after launch. So with that said, this was the kind of one of the first versions that we played with, and the key there is that it was a simple dribbling game at first. All you could do really was dribble around some fairly standard AI bots, and hopefully eventually get to the goal. That was the initial gameplay. Why was this a soccer game with a twist? Well, actually, you're just a ball. There's no one kicking this ball, so it doesn't look as much like a soccer game. And we find that actually is a more inviting solution. You can picture yourself being the one controlling the ball a bit more if you don't have a bot controlling it. So the innovation and the newness in this game came really from not necessarily the theme, not even really the gameplay, but almost how you communicate that, how you wrap it into an avatar that's simple and relatable. You kind of want to kick the ball when you watch it. And so that was actually very original. Like taking something out of the game made it more appealing in a sense. So kind of a reminder that as we improve games or ideas, adding things constantly is not necessarily the solution. So the second thing is that it is a bit of a hyper-casual sandbox. This game, it's a runner in a sense. You're going from A to B, but you can go back. You can take your time. You can explore the level, take as much or as little risk as you want. No pressure, and you feel that constant freedom in the game, freedom of choice as well, which makes it deeper. And it is a PvE game, player versus environment, in the sense that there was that lever. Adjusting the bots, adjusting the maps made it a big lever for balancing, for retention, for the feeling of challenge that you have in the game. So that's what kind of drove some initial stats, which you might find a bit surprising on the retention side. But actually very appealing on the kind of marketability side, or how are we attracting users? So the reason the game really was carried is probably more around the avatar and the way we're inviting users, rather than the depth in the game in its first form. So how did we improve retention, or how did the studio improve retention? They did so in a couple of ways, really. Sorry about the video on the left, which is supposed to be active, but essentially what the video depicts is the ability to do long kicks. So for some reason it's not reading, but what happens is, as we looked at player behavior, really users were looking for more depth and more engagement in the game, and also a risk-reward loop, we thought. And so Carol and the team at Orbital Knight designed the second control, which is the swipe, and enables a bit of a hack in the game so that you can take a long kick if you wish. And you can even, a future version actually enabled you to adjust the long kick with an additional swipe that controlled the ball trajectory. So these dual controls, we think, are pretty significant in giving users even more freedom than they had, in this sandbox environment, but also an ability to take shortcuts and hacks. And this is probably sounding pretty familiar if we compare it to the previous live stream on Aquapark, where you could clearly take some massive shortcuts through the game if your appetite for risk was there. Second thing that really helped version 2 in terms of the day one retention were the new levels. So simply designing more content. The studio knew that before they had good CPI in the first instance, they didn't want to take too much risk and design, say, 50, 60 levels before they knew that it was marketable. So there's a second point on version 2 which I think is important to address. The CPI went down a lot. 25 cents is fine. 16 cents is amazing, as you guys know. And one of the reasons we enable that is, as most of you know, there's an ability in the dashboard now to test multiple videos at the same time. So don't hesitate to really look for the best moment in the game that you think can depict the gameplay in a really clear way. So there's no doubt as to what the aim is. And B, maybe pick a particular rewarding time or one that explains that gameplay really well. And that's what happened here. We tested a few environments as a CPI. One of them was a beach environment, which worked quite well, and it allowed us to find a lower CPI. So version 3, as you can tell, has this. You can now see the long kick, but more importantly, there was some interesting adjustments made. So as I said, there's the post kick adjustment, which you can tell at the very end of that GIF. There's also some strong work on balancing using the bots, and it was a pretty simple mechanism actually, whereby the team decided that the kind of the riskless way of playing, so dribbling, should be easier, so that we can cater to a broader audience, while people who play in a more aggressive, risk-taking way should have a harder game, and that really does contribute to the depth you have in the game and the kind of the audience that you're able to target. And so to do that, we've basically made on a long shot, the goalie is more challenging. He's more responsive, harder to dupe, and it is harder effectively to get a long shot in. And then on the dribbling, the bots are a little bit slower. They won't catch up, and they're easier to dribble, essentially. Of course, we continued to work on new obstacles, like the cases you see, which are destructible, collectibles, which earn you coins. So we continue to add features, work on the maps that work well, create more of those, and iterate as we go. And so the result of that was, an improved day 1 significantly, up to 50%. Day 7 was now at 13%, which is an orange number on this slide, but actually 13% is a strong day 7 today, especially when you're looking at 12 to 15 minutes of playtime. Those are statistics that that are really enabling a launch today. So we did launch. We launched Crazy Kick end of August. It's been doing very well. You may have noticed the position in the charts went down a little bit, but that is completely normal, and the game continues to perform very well as we as we scale it and as we continue A/B tests on the game. Things that worked really well post-launch were things like new maps, adding a skin shop to the game, where you can unlock, as you can tell, at the top left of the screen, there are keys that you pick up. There are many types of collectibles. The keys unlock chests. The chests give you a skin shop. Also, we noticed that some difficulty was good. Adding hard levels here and there really helps you to unlock, skip levels or revives. And so from time to time, it's not bad to add those in. But all of those things are post-launch, and of course, we always work hand in hand with the studio when it comes to post-launch. In fact, probably a good thing to note is that we've really built out a post-launch capability that is fully dedicated to our external studios, and we really look forward to kind of getting you guys to meet them as you launch your games, in order to really help you, not only with the ideas, with the direction, with the roadmaps, but also purely on the execution and on the assets and on the things that work, and sharing more of that knowledge and resource. So with that said, you've probably heard enough from me, and I think what we'd like to do, as usual, is open up the discussion to questions from you guys. So please don't hesitate to ask, as usual, try to ask maybe content-related questions, so more about product, less about other factors, including we know that there have been some Facebook issues recently that we're trying to deal with. You've probably heard from us in that regard. So maybe if we do focus on product in this short time together, that would be great. And with that, yeah, we'll take our first questions.
Just before we start the Q&A, we had a pretty, actually lots of questions about the copies recently. If you looked at the charts starting last week, we had 2 games that were very similar to games published by Rolik. Of course, you can check out the whole log to look at the history. It's very clear that external studios we worked with for those 2 games, which are Stack Merge 3D and Commuters, they came up with the original idea. I'd say it's a bit shameful just on the creative side of things to see a copy, to see it rise in the charts from a competitor. We did everything necessary, and we still do the necessary things to make sure, first of all, your games will be higher in the charts than theirs, and we'll defend any studio we work with against copies.